If I ask you what the most iconic fight in history is, chances are you will talk to me about Georges Foreman. If the fight you're thinking of is one of the most well-known in history, I'd like to talk about a man whose career I consider to be one of the most underrated in history. This video is part of a 3-part series on the lives of Georges Foreman, Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali. Don't hesitate to subscribe and hit the bell to be sure to receive notifications from Adexalium. Foreman was born on January 10, 1949 in Marshall, Texas. His childhood was difficult and he stopped going to school at age 15 and became a street thief. He started boxing at the age of 16 and very quickly became one of the best boxers of his generation. He won the heavyweight title at the Olympics in 1968. If Big George's rise in the world of boxing is impressive, the 1960s were the decade of another legendary athlete. Cassius Clay became light heavyweight Olympic champion at the Rome Olympics in 1960 at just 18 years of age. After going professional and beating all his opponents, Clay got a shot at the WBA, WBC, NYSAC and ring belts in 1964. His opponent, Sonny Liston, was then considered one of the best heavyweights in history after beating the world champion Floyd Patterson in back-to-back fights with first-round knockouts. The Liston-Clay showdown was particularly anticipated due to the beef created by young Cassius Clay. Clay rented a bus and toured the neighborhood where Liston lived the day of the signing of the contract at 3 o'clock in the morning, urging him via megaphone to leave his home to receive his beating immediately. On the bus was written, "Sonny Liston will go in 8. Liston, who was an 8-1 favorite, tried to finish the fight as quickly as possible but was unable to reach his opponent. The world discovered the mere speed of Cassius Clay. Many stories exist around this legendary fight. We will come back to it in the third video of the series. Liston abandoned the fight during the 7th round. Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali in 1964 following his conversion to Islam. He retained his titles 9 times. In 1967, Ali refused to serve in the US military then engaged in the Vietnam War. This decision led to the loss of his title and his expulsion from professional boxing for 3 years and a suspended prison sentence of 5 years. Ali won in a Supreme Court judgment in 1971. When he returned in 1970, a man had successfully defended the 3 major world champion belts. Joe Frazier, Olympic heavyweight champion in 1964 in Tokyo, united the 3 belts after his victory against Jimmy Ellis in 1970.
You haven't tasted any of my punches yet, you know what I mean? And I did had a little taste of his on.
The return of King Ali happened in 1971. On March 8, at the Madison Square Garden in New York, Frazier won a fight after which both men ended up in the hospital. It seemed at the time that the relay had just passed and that the reign of Joe Frazier had begun. Few suspected at the time that the 5 most legendary years of heavyweight boxing had just begun.
Zaire, the people in Africa had more interest than any other country because they bid more of a price for it.
Enter Georges Foreman. The 24-year-old boxer had made a name for himself thanks to numerous knockouts and an impressive statistic of 34 wins for 0 defeats. However, promoters are known to pad records in boxing as one of the fighting disciplines with the most undefeated fighters. On January 22, 1973, 2 undefeated men faced each other in Kingston, Jamaica. While the fight was highly anticipated, nobody suspected what would happen. A reminder of the Liston-Peterson fight, Foreman atomized Frazier in 2 short minutes. The end of the fight speaks for itself.
It's hard to see how Frazier can last.
As Foreman defended his title twice, Muhammad Ali, whom many thought passed his age, emerged as the next contender after a win over Joe Frazier at the Madison Square Garden. Ali came back in the debate, but he must be the most feared man in the beginning of the 70s. The Ali-Foreman fight took place on October 30, 1974 in Kinshasa, a month after the scheduled date. So many things have been said about this fight, which is undoubtedly one of the greatest sporting events in history. One thing is certain, we tend to underestimate Ali's performance. Legend has it that he dodged Foreman to exhaustion. The reality is different. While Big George is known as one of the biggest punchers of all time, He has an excellent fighting IQ, which makes him wait for the right opportunity to reach his opponent. However, that night in Kinshasa, as Foreman would later say,
he was trying to win a boxing match. I was trying to kill that guy.
The images from the 8th round are legendary. One of the greatest comebacks in history had just happened. Muhammad Ali became world champion again 5 years after his title was taken away from him. Proof of the exceptional nature of Ali's victory, he refused to fight Big George again. Much has been written about this. Fear of Ali, of simple career management. The fight between the two men seemed inevitable when Foreman beat Joe Frazier again in 1976. Foreman was getting closer to a rematch and fought lower-ranked opponents in anticipation for his revenge. On March 17, 1977, he faced Jimmy Young, a boxer with a record of 20 wins, 5 defeats and 2 draws. Against all expectations, Foreman, whom everyone already saw beating Ali, lost by decision. More than a second career loss, Foreman felt his impending doom in the locker room.
I was cool enough walking back and forward, heard a voice say, "You know, you, George Foreman, you don't have to worry about boxing. You can go home and retire, go to your ranch and retire and die." And I heard a voice say, "Well, you believe in God, why are you scared to die?" And I was scared. I was about to die. Who want to die? I spent years getting my body right. And I tried to make a deal, because I knew this wasn't anyone in the room. I said, "I'm still George Foreman. I can box and give money to charity and to fight for cancer." The voice answered me back from within, "I don't want your money, I want you." Then I knew that wasn't in the room. No one turned down money. I fought for my life and lost. The next thing you know, I was out.
The career of Big George came to an abrupt end at the age of 28 after 45 wins and 2 losses, including 1 knockout, at the hands of Muhammad Ali. One of the greatest boxers of his generation, we can wonder what would have happened to Foreman's career if he hadn't retired so young. Joe Frazier's career ended in 1981, 5 years after his last fight lost against Georges Foreman. Muhammad Ali hung up the gloves a month later, after 2 lost fights against Larry Holmes and Trevor Burbank. Ali, Frazier and Foreman were the protagonists of one of the most legendary rivalries in sports history. The general accepted opinion is that Ali was the greatest of this era, being the only one who beat both his opponents. Frazier lost both his fights against Foreman, and Big George never had an opportunity to fight Ali again. On October 18, 1989, the 3 men appeared on an episode of BBC's Very Funny.
But believe me, if there's anyone that's going to lay claim to the greatest, other than Joe Frazier, I'd have to put that tag on Muhammad Ali. Mainly because he whipped me, you know.
You're a huge guy, though. You seem to be the biggest.
A big one.
This is a big one, isn't it?
My feet weren't big enough to keep me up on the canvas, though.
This gathering between 3 legends is a magnificent end to their story. But that's not the end of George Foreman. Indeed, 2 years prior to this interview, the then 38-year-old decided to make his comeback on the ring. It appears that this comeback, like many others before, was caused by financial difficulties. Foreman wanted to help his church financially. He also quoted in other interviews that he wanted to prove that 40 wasn't a death sentence. This decision seems risky to say the least when we take a look at the very long list of legends who have made the fight too many. The disbelief of the commentators gradually faded as Foreman continued to beat his opponents as if he was 25. He won the majority of his fights by knockout. Like another rising star, Mike Tyson, 17 years his junior, world champion in the latter half of the 1980s. An impressive streak of 24 wins gave Foreman another shot at becoming world champion 17 years after losing it to Ali. His opponent, Evander Holyfield, became WBA, WBC and IBF world champion after his victory against James Buster Douglas. Douglas had beaten Tyson in 1990 in one of the biggest upsets in boxing history, with odds up to 42-1. Holyfield, unfortunately better known for having part of his ear torn off by Mike Tyson than for his exceptional career, will put an end to the Foreman fairy tale. At 42, Big George loses the 3rd fight of his career. Note the stamina of Foreman, who only lost by decision. While the Ali-Frazier-Foreman trio is rightly referred to as one of the greatest rivalries of all time, the 1990s saw a resurgence in heavyweight boxing. Lennox Lewis, Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe, the return of Foreman. The world champions of this era are all worth remembering years later. While many thought he was about to retire, Foreman, then well into his 40s, kept fighting the same year with a victory after Jimmy Ellis. In order to have any hope of fighting for the title again, a fight against Tyson seemed inevitable. However, both camps decided to avoid confrontation for as long as possible due to a mutual understanding of the opponent's strength. Tyson, little known for his humility, would later say in an interview,
"Heavy puncher."
The heaviest?
Yeah.
See, I thought that was you.
Nah, yeah.
If we cannot delay the inevitable, Tyson's career came to an abrupt end in 1992 with his incarceration for reasons that cannot be openly discussed on YouTube. Even stars eventually die, and the end seemed near as Foreman lost his fourth fight, the third for a world title, against Tommy Morrison. Against all odds, Michael Moore, who beat Holyfield 6 months earlier, offered himself a gala fight against Foreman, who was about to turn 46. By the mere sight of the physique of the two men and their age difference of almost 20 years, we understand that the goal for Moore is to consolidate his world title thanks to a prestigious victory against a legendary opponent. We can be saddened by the fact that one of the greatest heavyweights in history is now used to promote other people's careers. Michael Moore dominates the fight. At the start of the last round, we can rejoice at the fact that Georges Foreman would have suffered only one knockout in his entire career at the hands of what many consider to be the greatest athlete of all time. Two details are unavoidable upon watching this fight. Foreman's declining form is evident from his boxing pants that look 2 sizes too small. On the technical side, we can only lament at the fact that Foreman only punches with his left, using his right to keep his opponent at bay. Let's focus on this image for a second. Some of you may have noticed that Foreman's pants are none others than the ones he used against Muhammad Ali during the Rumble in the Jungle. As for his right hand,
Great right hand landing for Foreman. He's had a pretty good round here in number 10.
Again, Atlas didn't count the Atlas. Here we go again with the Atlas. Michael Moore is
Down goes Moore on a right hand. An unbelievably close-in right hand shot. 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It happened. It happened.
Foreman's 90s rise to the top constitutes not only one of the most memorable comebacks, but in my opinion one of the greatest feats in sports history. He became the oldest world champion in history, the world champion with the greatest age difference with his opponent, as well as the only one to have regained a world title 20 years after losing it. Foreman won this fight the same way he lost the Rumble in the Jungle, defending against a stronger opponent and eventually dealing the knockout blow. Foreman defended his title 3 times until beaten by Shannon Biggs by decision on November 20, 1997, 2 months before his 49th birthday. Foreman hung up his gloves a second time. Georges Foreman has a professional record of 76 victories, including 68 KOs, 5 defeats including only 1 KO, which, unfortunately for him, is the most famous fight of his career, if not in sports history. Georges Foreman for many is linked to a grill that made him a rich man. For others, he's the loser of the greatest fight of all time. I hope that this video helped you understand why Georges Foreman is, in my humble opinion, the most underrated fighter in history. This video is the first in a series about Muhammad Ali, Georges Foreman and Joe Frazier. YouTube's algorithm seems to take great pleasure in burying the channel's video, so I invite you to press the bell so as not to miss the next videos. Tell me in the comments what moments from Frazier and Ali's lives you would like to see on the channel.
Muhammad was that guy, oh my gracious. I really fell in love with him.
Right.
Because he always had something to say, even when he couldn't speak anymore. Once I called him up, I said, hey, Muhammad, I want a rematch. He said, you crazy.